when you know that 1967 happened, and you can see the legacy of it, and you know the terror and the shock it did to this community, and then you know a lot about fire, as I do, and you know that your city is very, very vulnerable. It's basically surrounded by flammable bushland. You know, I'm afraid, I'm surprised how afraid I am. In the deck, there's a card called 1967 or worse, and one day the card's going to be dealt. The scary thing is we don't know how often these cards are in the deck. But if we get something 67 or worse, we could burn a quarter of the island down in 3 hours. And that means thousands of people will die. And I'm afraid of that. What happened here on the 7th of February 1967, I would argue, was a seminal moment in fire ecology. There were a lot of fires burning around the landscape in southern Tasmania, and it just so happened on that day a conjunction of extreme fire weather events all converged, namely very high temperatures on the back of a drought, on the back of a very wet spring, so there was an abundance of fuel. That had all been dried out, had a very hot day, and then the trigger were these intense, strong northerly winds coming right from the heart of the interior of the continent, and it went down over the mountain and it burnt all the way down into the edge of the city, and sparks were showering into the suburbs and houses were being burnt. And at the very last moment, the city was about to be incinerated. The wind dropped and the city was saved. We're carrying an enormous risk here. That event's going to happen again, but we don't know when it's going to happen again. We have no idea what the natural return time is, let alone what additional effect global climate change is having. The power of Tasmania is we have long-lived trees. They have beautiful tree rings and they are fire sensitive. So Athrotaxis is very significant to try to bracket or understand what is the return time of extreme fire events.
We're on a place called Brotenella Rise. It's about as close to wilderness as you get. So there's no people, no roads. You can fly in there to do bushwalking, that's about all. I mean, there's patches of Athrotaxis all through that landscape, and about a third of the distribution of these Athrotaxis has actually been burnt in the early 19th century. So obviously there's been a fire that's killed this tree. So the outer ring of the tree ring chronology that we find should give us a clue as to when these trees died. So the pith should give us the establishment date of the tree, so when the tree started growing. And out here near Andreas's thumb should give us the date of the day the tree died, so when it got hit by fire.
And so we want to understand how much and where, and to some extent, these trees actually can survive or coexist with fire.
What's important about this place is it's so indicative of something that's happening across the island, and Andreas and I have been walking around in this landscape and we've seen 10 seedlings after maybe 2 days of walking all across the landscape. So there's no regeneration, so once these fires get in, it's basically the end of Kingully pine in this little valley, at least as far as we can tell.
So let's say there could have been a fire in the late 1700s, and it appears that a lot of trees established after that. And so why trees are not establishing after the fires in the 1930s? Those are the kind of questions that we're trying to answer.
The delineation of the Wilderness World Heritage Area basically goes around the distribution of Athrotaxis, around the distribution of Kingully pine and pencil pine. So as a conservation issue, I guess it's pretty troubling that in the last 100 years, a third of its distribution is gone. As an ecologist, admittedly, it's quite exciting because I can see it's a mystery to be solved. It's like, wow, look at all these dead trees, and they're sort of ghost-like figures. But as someone who values, I'm a bushwalker and I love walking in landscape, so to see death and destruction all around is also quite disturbing, admittedly, and I think most people would admit to that.
We're on the foot slopes of Mount Wellington, which is a large mountain that forms the backdrop to Hobart, the capital of the island of Tasmania. Charles Darwin climbed Mount Wellington when he visited Hobart. One of the great ironies is that Charles Darwin didn't make any reference or thought about the fact that these forests were flammable. He didn't know that. But I always say, Mount Wellington is sort of a volcano, a biological volcano. I don't want to see it go up, but it will go up. I know that. It has gone up several times. But the next time under climate change could be terrible. I'm afraid of that.